thank you for joining us for CBM Calling today. We're so glad that you've decided to spend a few minutes with us this afternoon. Today, Gordon and I are joined by two very special people. We're joined by our pastors. So if you've been watching CBM Calling over these last few months, you probably will have seen a lot of our field staff or partners, or we've mostly focused on our international work. But today we're focusing a little bit closer to home. And one thing that our two pastors have in common, so what Todd and Justin have in common, is that they're actually both American. And I think both from North Carolina originally, which is kind of ironic, a bit of a coincidence. But both of you have been here now pastoring in Canada over the past few years. So I'm going to just quickly introduce the two of you. So Justin Joplin is my pastor at Lorne Baptist Church here in Mississauga. And Todd Thomason, you're just a few kilometers, I think, down the highway from where Lorne Park is in Etobicoke, which is the west side of Toronto. And you are at Kingsway Baptist Church where Gordon worships. So we're so glad that both of you have decided to join us today. Thank you so much for doing that. So I'm going to ask Justin the first question because Justin, I know that you've just celebrated 6 years here in Canada. Yesterday. I can't believe it's been that long already. I remember the first time that we met you, and that just seemed like not that long ago. But when I look at your sons, that's how I know it's been 6 years already, because your youngest was just a baby when I first met you. So 6 years.
7 months
Congratulations.
Old. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
So I'm wondering, what is one thing that maybe has been surprisingly great about your time in Canada? Like, what is one thing that you have loved about Canadian culture?
Well, there's a lot to love about Canadian culture for sure. I think it may sound a little stereotypical, but one of the things that we as a family have really fallen in love with is hockey. I started playing about a year after I moved here, and there's a group of guys from the church that play on Saturday nights, a couple of women too. It's really cool, and both my sons play now, and we miss it a lot. I think my oldest is like we just got some hockey skates with wheels on them, like inline hockey skates, in the mail today, and I think he's breaking them in just outside this window. So it's pretty cool how huge it is. I tell people back home, like, it's so big, it's like there are hockey players printed on our money, and it's pretty big.
Well, Todd, I'm going to ask you the flip side of that question then. What is one Canadian thing or Canadian-ism that has been surprising to you or has really baffled you?
A lot of things we just kind of roll with, but the terminology for different things is different. So like the word duotang, the first time that we saw that came home from school on an assignment list, it was like, what the heck is a duotang?
Yes.
And interesting things like that. I'm still getting used to the word barbecue as a verb. And yes. I know that's not just a Canadianism, but there's parts of the U.S. that have it wrong too. Where Justin and I come from, barbecue is a noun, and it's something that I miss. So
it's sacred. It's very important.
It's supposed to be called a cookout, right? Is that
that's
how?
right?
Is that
yes, a cookout.
Yeah.
Really?
I think I learned that from you, Justin. Actually.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
See, we're educating you.
Yep.
Well,
right.
Remember Todd explained, and I don't know if you have the time to do it here, but Todd explained to our congregation at Kingsway when he came the difference between y'all and all y'all.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah, all y'all's plural of y'all. That's
there you go. There you go. Well, as this has come down very quickly, and Jennifer said off the top, we've been talking to a lot of people that are very far away, and this is all clamped down on all of us very quickly. But what's one thing that maybe in each of our churches that you've seen that's been a surprise as we've navigated church in the last sort of 10-ish weeks?
Good surprise.
Yeah, well,
I mean, I'm really the speed at which we were able to adapt at Kingsway. I mean, we weren't doing any kind of. I mean, we were recording, sermons and choir anthems and things like that, doing audio recording. We weren't streaming anything. before this, and the speed with which we've been able to adapt to doing online worship, I've been just, it's been a really wonderful surprise, and so many people have worked so hard just to make it happen, and everybody's just kind of rolled with it, and it's just been really, it's been really great. And we're still tweaking things and experimenting and trying to figure out how to make the most of it. But it's the response has just been really well. That this is what we need to do, and we're going to do it. And our attendance, just based on number of people tuning in, has been very consistent the last couple of months. So and it's actually enabled some people that we have in our congregation who, for health reasons or other reasons, weren't able to attend as much. They can be there a lot more regularly now and engaged in ways that are actually more direct than they could do before. So that's been a silver lining and a blessing to all of us.
Yeah, well, it's like this show. When the technology works, it's great. But last Sunday was Zoom
Yes.
did go a bit sideways.
We are beholden to it. I mean,
Yeah.
and there are definitely downsides to it. And Miss, I haven't had a hug from Bill Johnston in 10 weeks, and that's
right.
Fill the void of that.
That's right. This guy's got us
at Kingsway, but but we're rolling with it, and that's been.
Yeah.
It's been really positive.
Yeah. Justin, any unexpected delight?
I would echo a lot of what Todd said. It's incredible to me how we've adapted. I have to brag on my staff, because every single one of them is coming up with creative ways to do ministry with their respective kind of constituencies in the midst of this. And our children's and pastoral care minister, Laura Selacandu, will be hosting a conference called Prayer Time. I think that starts in about 20 minutes. John Cullen, our youth minister, has a background in videography. So like he's been a wizard in this, and is hosting youth on different virtual hangouts like 3 nights a week. My oldest son's in youth, and he's loving it. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because John, who is very well versed in technology, had been speaking to our leadership about possibly live streaming for some of our homebound members. And we started having this conversation probably last November and earlier this year. And it was a lot of shaking our heads and saying, I just don't know if we're ready for that. And then all of a sudden, just like that, it's the only way we know how to do it. And it's nothing short of miraculous that we're able to almost not miss a beat. Jennifer was just saying before we started the interview that like she was commenting on my setup, and like I've just kind of settled into this place. This is actually in some ways better than my pulpit, that I'm able to just sit here on Sunday mornings and connect with people. And I have, those first couple of weeks I was in a pretty rough spot in terms of I was feeling pretty down about how we might be able to connect, and a lot of that has kind of turned around as I've seen that change happen, and this is kind of what we're used to now.
How are you doing with connecting with family back home? As we were saying, you guys are really about probably an 11-hour car ride home, but you might as well be on the other side of the world like some of our field staff. So how are things going back home for your extended families? Justin, you want to?
Yeah, I've been trying to get my family to install WhatsApp. So my cell bills are down a little bit. I keep forgetting it's like almost $1 a text message when I text people in the States, and they're not on like the iMessage. So it's my mom actually just out of the blue sent us a card with a check in it and said this is to cover some of the cell bill. Not on like the iMessage. We had a long running text thread going where we were mostly just like talking about what we were cooking and how we were what we were eating for the first week or month or so. They're doing well. I try to check in with them as often as I can. We don't always have really long conversations, but we just we do follow up with one another. Sometimes it can be a little difficult just because attitudes towards the coronavirus vary from place to place, and we'll get off the phone with parents and just kind of shake our head and said, boy, we shouldn't have said anything. Because it just the language about the illness is very politicized. But, you know, like I had a great conversation with my mom on Mother's Day. It was kind of sad at the end because I had to say, I don't know when I'm going to see you again. And usually this time of year, I can say, we'll be down in about 6 weeks. Or they'll be up in about 6 weeks. And so that's tough, but they're staying healthy. They're staying in for the most part, and they're doing okay.
Yeah. What about you, Todd?
Yeah, my in-laws are more technologically experienced than my mom is. My mom has nothing to do with a computer of any kind. So you know, try to call her, you know, every week and just check in. But she's doing fine. This hasn't altered her habits very much, and she's being cautious, and you know, she's not venturing out very much, which is the smartest thing that you can do. She misses her book club, but you know, she's staying in. So we talked to her on the phone. We did Mad Libs with her one afternoon, myself and the girls, and that was lots of fun. But my in-laws are on FaceTime and on Facebook, and so, you know, we connect with them there. And a real silver lining of this has been that my father-in-law has started doing story time every night over FaceTime with Mary and Emma. So it's story time with Papa, and they've read The Hobbit, and they did. I think they started the Lord of the Rings trilogy now, and it's something they look forward to, and he looks forward to, and it's
that's sweet.
Good.
That's lovely. I think we're going to spend a few minutes here just saying hello to some of the people that are watching. We do have some people that are joining us, and we've had people join us from all over the world who watch this with us. So that's always a highlight. So we're going to say hello to Gary Legan, who is watching from
father-in-law. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yay. From Knoxville, Tennessee. And Royce Getson, who is watching from the North Queens area of Nova Scotia, and our friend Michelle Bazile right here in Ontario.
Yeah.
We all know Michelle from the Toronto Baptist Ministerial Association. And Robert Amanda McCormick, watching in Wittenberg, Nova Scotia, and Nancy Webb from Kingsway. So,
hey, Nancy.
Hey, Nancy. Well, it's good to hear all these family and friends, in your case, that are joining us today. I wanted to follow up, Justin, on one of the things you just said around the conversation around this whole pandemic being more politicized in the U.S. Are you seeing major differences in the way, kind of just the attitudes? Are they different in the way that we kind of look at things here in the Toronto area and how it's being talked about back home?
Yes, sometimes. I occasionally wonder whether that's a difference between one country or another, or just a difference between like the social circle I'm in versus the social circle my parents are in. You know, somebody recently sent me this letter that a bunch of churches signed, and they sent to the premier saying, you got to open our churches, because they've never closed churches ever. And I thought, boy, what an irresponsible thing. And, you know, unfortunately, probably a third of the churches were listed as Baptist churches. So that's happening right here in Ontario, primarily. And it sounds like the kind of thing that you're seeing on the news out of like Florida or North Carolina or Georgia. So sometimes I think it's more to do with just the people that I'm connected to, and those folks, at least in my context and with our congregational history, are a little more, I guess, compassionate and cautious. But yeah, we've had conversations with family that, whether it's like the illness itself is kind of a hoax, which I got from some family early on, or some of the medications that people, like the anti-malarials and the other medications that are not COVID medications, like, well, I saw on YouTube that like if I take this, it'll be better, and so our habit is just, don't argue, because it's not really worth it. But the conversations do get a little, I don't know, exhausting is probably not the right word, but we just sort of, there's just one of those, you hang up with somebody back home and kind of roll your eyes and just move on. Maybe that's I don't know. I don't want to tell on myself too much, but that's kind of the way it goes. Yeah.
Todd, I wonder do you see a difference in just the church culture? I mean, having grown up in the US, and I lived in the US for a time as well, and I saw a very big difference in the way religion is perceived. I think here we would regard religion as mostly private, or church is very private, whereas I think there's a political element to religion, Christianity in particular, that we don't really see here in Canada as much. That is very, very prevalent in the US.
Well, I think just to kind of echo what Justin was saying about the coronavirus, I think it also depends on what circles you're in and what churches you're in. And I think there is a political edge to religion in the United States that I don't sense so much here. But I think, Justin, you used a good word. I think it's been religion, especially the evangelical Christian faith, has been politicized, which is different than faith being political. I mean, I personally think that there is a political. Read the Christmas story in Luke is very political. To declare Jesus as Lord is to make a political statement. But what has happened in the States is that, Martin Luther King Jr. has been, such an idol for me for so many years. And, when I think about what, the best sort of political leveraging and utilization of faith looks like that's what it looks like. And Dr. King taught lots of people that. He taught Jerry Falwell that too, though. And so there's, what's happened in the States is that, evangelical Christians have become, they've become a voting block of one particular political party. And so that becomes now the lens through which things are processed. And that's one of the part of the reason how we've gotten to where we are now. It didn't happen overnight. It's been happening for 40 years.
Yeah.
And they're not, and folks in those circles haven't been subtle about it. It's no, if you are a faithful Christian, you vote Republican. Like, that's been the line. And so I don't see so much of that up here as I do in the States. But the whole part of the adjustment process for me has been the whole terminology, what it means to be liberal in the States and liberal here is different. And the same with conservative. It's not, and I still, I'll be talking to people, and they will, in the course of a conversation, will blend things, perspectives on politics, on the environment, on any number of things in ways that I wouldn't expect or see somebody do in the same way back home. So the whole definition of what those terms mean here is different. And it's not so entrenched. I think that's what gives me, like, that's what I lament. It's become so, the trenches are just so deep. Like, it's like Justin said, sometimes you can't, there's no sense in talking about it or trying to have a debate, because it's not going to go anywhere. It's
Justin, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I am still 6 years in, kind of, I lose my bearings sometimes because of that interesting blend of, kind of how Canadian Christians, or at least the ones that I've gotten to know, feel about social issues, political issues, everything. And there, I remember Baptist News Global running a story about like conservative socialist Christianity in the Canadian prairies, and just thinking, wow, but it was I'm drawing a blank on the writer's name, but he grew up. He's in the States. I think he lives in Texas, and he grew up as the son of a Baptist preacher out west in the prairies, where like Tommy Douglas like took the whole province socialist as a Baptist minister.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's this kind of mix of like Billy Graham and Oscar Romero in Canadian Christianity that just doesn't compute in the States, where it's more like Billy Graham with like Jerry Falwell. And so it's hard to know like what to say or how to say things. I often tell people I kind of miss prophetic preaching because I don't know what that looks like up here. I talk about like, I think you all have done a pretty good job of that is CBM has done a good job of keeping us aware of the need for social change here in Canada. You know, I'll probably never forget that graphic that you ran across the center spread of one of your Mosaic magazines about the similarities between the experience of discrimination between African Americans in the States and Indigenous people here in Canada. And so that's not something that I think a lot of times Canadians just think, well, we're better than our neighbors to the south, and so we get the badge of honor. But you know, like, boy, it's easy to get distracted by what we see happening south and think that's not happening here. But in some cases, it is. Maybe just not in the same ways.
Right.
Absolutely. And our friend Cheryl Bear would definitely agree with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk to almost any Indigenous person and they'll give you a very different spin on, and I'm really grateful for the ways that you all have amplified her voice and given her a platform. She was in our sanctuary every Sunday during Advent, at least by video, and I think once in person. So when I was away, and that means a lot to our churches.
Yeah, no, amen to that.
Well, that's amazing that you both dropped Tommy Douglas's name or acknowledged Tommy Douglas. You're deep in our culture.
I have. Wait a minute. Where is it?
Well
I
done.
have. It's not up, but I have a picture of Walter Rauschenbusch that is sometimes back here in my and Rauschenbusch was sort of an American version of Tommy Douglas. So that was in my. He's been replaced by Mary and the baby Jesus, although you can just barely see the top of her head.
Well, I think, you know, for me, and it's probably true for a lot of Canadians, like if I have to, when I do turn into the news, and given, you know, my position with CBM, I'm pretty in tune with what's going on in the news. But man, that is like a fire hose getting turned on. I know it's true for every place, but as our dear pastors, if you can speak pastorally, and as dear American brothers, how do we contextualize that fire hose of what comes out of your, you know, home capital in the South, and the you know, just like, what would you say that Canadians need to see past, as if, you know, what I watch or get on my feed is all that's going on? Like, kind of touched on it already, but how would you encourage Canadians to look past the chaos? How do we deal with that kind of media stream?
It's hard. I mean, one of the things that I lament is that a lot of what's happening in American politics has become, and even in the American economy, has sort of become unmoored from reality. Like if you look at the stock market, Wall Street, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, 20 million Americans have lost their jobs, and the stock market has budged, you know, a little bit, but it's not much more than a correction, which I think is evident of the fact that there's a disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what's happening, you know, kind of, you know, on the news. And the same with politics. I mean, there's I saw a poll or a report, you know, just a couple of days ago that's, you know, that all of the stuff with the coronavirus hasn't really budged people's opinion of President Trump or much else, that things now are very much the same as they were before. And that's disheartening in in one sense, but it's also, I think, hopeful in another sense that what you see on the news is not the whole picture. And there are a lot of people in the States who are, who are protesting, who are working, to try to, to make the country better. And I mean, as an American, I really still fall back on our founding documents and the fact that we have this Declaration of Independence, we have these ideals that have been put to paper, and that's always something that we have to fall back on. I mean, I mentioned Dr. King earlier, and that's something that he really leveraged, to push back against criticism of him. Is, all we're asking is that you be true to what you said on paper. That all men are created equal, and so there's that. There's a place to put your foot to kind of, stop the fall or regain your balance, or, something that to help keep yourself upright in these crazy times. So, I mean, I tend to be an optimist, and but America's been through a lot over its 400 year history, and yeah, I'm confident that this will come out of this too. But it's hard, and it's so much of it is just the, this, like you said, I think it's a good analogy, Gordon. It's a fire hose. It's just especially in our internet information age, like it just doesn't stop, and that makes it hard to. And at some point, you become just kind of numb to it.
Justin, did you have a comment to that?
It is a lot. I've been a little mystified since moving here how much attention Canadians pay to American politics and how little attention they pay to Canadian politics. And boy, like I feel a bit like an outsider again, like back to that sort of, I don't know what prophetic preaching looks like here. It's kind of hard to know what political engagement looks like in this context, because I still vote as on Carson Street in Richmond, Virginia, according to my registration, and that's the way absentee voting works. It's just based on where you live the last time you were in the States. And so I can vote for a school board representative in South Richmond, even though I'll probably never live there again. But I feel really disconnected from all that. And then I can't vote, at least not yet, here in Canada. And so you just kind of feel like you're in limbo in a sense. Appreciate optimism from other folks. I try to pick that up just by hanging out around optimistic people. Sometimes I tend to be a little bit more cynical. But yeah, I mean, I would encourage folks to. It's hard. I don't have concrete steps for how to do this, but pay attention to what's happening here. Again, I think you all do a great job helping at least stuff that CBM's putting out become more aware of social issues that have a political aspect here in Canada. Yeah, I mean, get involved as you can here, and sometimes that's not easy to do because you don't control all the media that comes across your screen or your feed, but there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, thanks. So that's a good piece of advice that a previous guest of ours, Charlene Craig, said to me, is just tune out the voices when you're not in a place that you can handle.
Sometimes, I mean,
sometimes that's just what we need to do.
I'm it's funny. I mentioned hockey a bit ago. One of the strangest experiences I've ever had here. I was playing one Saturday night, and it was like my first or second year. I'm still not great, but like I was not as good back then. Still kind of wobbly on my feet. And I came off my shift and sat down on the bench, and the guy sitting next to me looked at me and said, "You're American, aren't you?" And I am, as a matter of fact. And I thought he was going to make some comment on the way I was playing. Okay. And this is in the middle of like an hour of hockey. And he says, "What do you think about that Donald Trump guy?" I'm like, now you're going to, like, one, that's your follow-up question to, "You're American, aren't you?" Like, nobody would ever ask you that in the States. Like, what do you think? You know, just, "I don't know you real well. What do you think about the president?" And for some reason, Canadians think, "Oh, you're American. Talk to me about the most controversial thing in the whole country." Like, let's start there. Not nice weather we're having, or how about those Jays, or like, you know, it's like, "What do you think about Donald Trump?" And you know, sometimes I want to turn that around and say, "Well, what do you think? What do you think about Justin Trudeau? What do you think about Premier Ford? Like, tell me anything about them." Because honestly, it's, you know, sometimes it's hard. It's harder to figure that stuff out than. And those, you know, for those of us living in the Toronto area, that's a more relevant question than what do you think about the President of the United States?
Right.
Well, that's very wise, Justin. So everyone watching, if you have an American friend, do not lead off your conversation by asking what they think about
Like, yeah,
the president.
boy.
We will take that advice to heart, and thank you both so much, Todd and Justin, for joining us today. I think we had a lot of laughs as well, and talked about a few serious things. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
Gordon,
for
what
the
do we
invitation.
have going on Monday, Gordon, on CBM Calling?
Yes, you can shut your bandwidth down and then join us again on Monday at 2:30 right here on CBM Calling. And Adrian Gardner is speaking with David McGee from Enlace, who's our partner in some of the work we do in Central America. So that's at 2:30. So I get to say at this point, thank all y'all
Thanks,
for being
y'all.
on this call.
Yeah.
Did pretty well.
There's only three of us. Is it y'all or all y'all?
Would that be all y'all
I would
or
just say
y'all?
y'all.
I just say y'all. Yeah, this is not big enough for all y'all. But if you're speaking to everyone tuning in on Facebook, then that would be all y'all.
All right. Well, thank you everyone tuning in on Facebook. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
Great chatting.
Thank you.